Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. So given that the topic is Silicon Valley versus everywhere else, I'd just like to start by going down the line, and if you can tell the audience where you're doing business right now, where your company is headquartered, or where you have offices, and how you got there. Oh, so Jill, you can start.
Yeah. Just waiting on you to finish.
Yeah.
So I'm Jill Ford. I'm the principal at Toyota AI Ventures, which is based in Los Altos, California. And I'm actually new to the team. I moved there from Detroit, where I was the head of innovation and entrepreneurship for the city of Detroit. In Detroit, we actually have a slogan, Detroit versus everybody, so I love the title you came up with for the panel.
Yeah. Great. And then Tracy?
I'm Tracy Dinunzio. I'm the founder and CEO of Tradesy. We are the world's largest peer-to-peer marketplace for women's fashion, and we're based in Santa Monica, where we were founded many years ago.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm Nicolas, founder of Algolia. We're a search API helping companies like Twitch or Medium to power their internal search. We're headquartered in San Francisco, but as my accent tells, actually come from Paris. That's where we started. And today we have a big team in Paris, a big team in San Francisco, and also teams in New York, London, and Atlanta.
Great. So obviously, Silicon Valley is still the center that many investors, many startup founders think they need to be in. I'm curious, tell me about your experiences being in San Francisco. First of all, if you think, do you think the idea that Silicon Valley is the center of everything, has that changed at all since you guys have started your respective companies or done business? I'm curious to hear what you think about the need to be in Silicon Valley.
I would say in today's connected world, we find that there's a number of companies that are really distributed across the country and a lot of times outside of the country as well. So it's important for companies to consider which portions of their company would be best in which places, and to be open to having their team in the location that works the best for that.
Yeah. And then, Tracy, have you felt any pressure being in Los Angeles to move to Silicon Valley?
Well, I think Silicon Valley is not the center of everything, but it used to be the capital of both capital and talent. I think it's still where you find the most capital, so it's hard to avoid spending time in Silicon Valley wherever you start your company. As you continue raising and you need dollars from larger funds, you kind of have a hard time still avoiding going to the Valley. But in terms of talent, I think that we've learned over the years that there are pockets of extraordinary talent in cities across the country. In Los Angeles especially, there's been a real startup explosion driven by tremendous talent across the areas of marketing, product, and for us, we actually have in LA, something that's very little known, is we graduate 6,000 engineers a year from over 100 universities. So people tend to think that engineering talent comes from the Valley, but we actually have a bigger, stronger community of engineers in LA than the Valley does. And I suspect many cities have a lot of talent like that that's undervalued or undersold in the tech media.
Yeah.
I guess that it really depends of the type of talent. For us engineers, you have great engineers everywhere in the world. And so we have all of our engineers in Paris, and that's a great advantage compared to other companies based in San Francisco. But when it comes to sales, marketing, product, especially for a tech product like ours, most of the talents are actually in the Bay Area. So it really depends of which talent. And maybe to answer your question, I get the chance to see two very, very different ecosystems between San Francisco and Paris. And it did change a lot in the last 5 years. San Francisco is still at the top of the world, let's be clear. It's still growing pretty fast, but it's becoming more and more challenging, especially to attract talents. While Paris was starting from way further behind. And actually, I mean, it's not comparable to San Francisco today, but it's catching up, including in terms of investment. When we started there, we actually did our first seed round in Paris. Well, let's say that the terms were not the ones you would find in the Bay Area. Today, when I look at other companies, well, it's definitely you have a discount, but not by that much. And so, yes, it's catching up, and I think it's not Paris, it's like all over the world. The market, the investment market has become pretty much global, and even funds from the Valley are investing elsewhere.
Yeah.
And another important factor is where are the customers, right? When you think about the talent and capital that's been spoken about, the reason that you need those is so that you can get to customers. And being able to be in the right proximity that's going to help you to get customers is something that's an important consideration in where you're going to have portions of your business or perhaps the entire business.
Right. So I talked to different mayors or organizations in different cities that are trying to recruit more startups, and there's a lot of things they want to focus on, right? They want to get more capital, they want to get more talent. In your guys' mind, I mean, what are some of the most important factors or I guess resources needed for a city to attract more startups? You know, what was going through your mind when you're considering expanding or choosing new locations?
I think capital. So whenever I see a new VC put a stake in the ground in LA, I get really excited because I know it doesn't just mean, you know, having more startups is great, but if startups don't have access to capital, they eventually lose the ability to compete with startups that have better access to capital. And I can tell you, being a 45-minute plane ride away from the Valley is advantageous in a way. I get to go up there and meet with investors, and most of my investors are now from the Valley. But I also get to see how the startups we compete with that are located up there just encounter investors as a regular part of their day or their social life or the events that they attend. And over time, that engenders trust and familiarity that you don't get in an outside market. So I think as long as the capital is centralized in the Valley, it is challenging to build companies in other cities. And so bringing venture investors into other cities, I think is super important. Even if it's just at the pre-seed and seed stage, that's okay, because once you're off the ground, you can travel to find your investors, so early stage capital.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of the whole ecosystem. So capital is like the most important probably, but it takes time to build that. You can probably try with an accelerator, like to encourage vocation, young out of college people, or encourage them to create a startup. But I would say that the most important is actually to have successful startups. Successful startups are going to create kind of like people are going to be inspired by them, and more importantly, the founders, once they maybe they sell the company or maybe they become successful, they are going to give back to their community.
Yes.
They are going to mentor the other entrepreneurs. It's kind of a virtuous circle there, but it takes a lot of time. You cannot change an ecosystem overnight. It takes years or a decade or two.
Yeah.
It's important to have a balanced ecosystem. You need all of the things that companies need to be able to start and grow. So customers, talent, capital, but you also need to make sure that you have the surrounding elements to give a good lifestyle to people as they're living as well. When they come to a city, they're going to be doing more than working. They're going to have homes and families and friends and things to do. And so it's important to consider the space and how affordable it is to live as well. As people are getting capital into their company, one of the considerations is how long will that capital last? And in certain places where lifestyle is more affordable, there's the opportunity to use that capital for a longer period of time.
Right. And it's no secret that the cost of doing business in the Bay Area continues to rise. And within that vein, one thing I have heard of more startups considering is just how do you build a distributed team? And they're considering moving more operations out of the Bay Area and expanding elsewhere. So I'm curious, Tracy and Nicolas, with your companies, if that's, you know, how you're considering building a distributed team, and do you think it's right for every startup?
Well, we started in Paris and moved to SF. So in a way, we became distributed by default. It's super challenging. So don't dismiss the cost of communication. Communication becomes super challenging, and it's going to slow you down. So especially in the early days, I may not recommend that. Actually, it's probably better to start only in SF or only in your country, and then build that later. That said, if you create a company like us in Paris, for our product, our ecosystem was in SF, in San Francisco. And so we were basically traveling back and forth. Traveling is really cheap, is way cheaper than creating a team. And you can travel like once a month. I mean, yes, jet lag, but still feasible. And even fake it. You can fake your presence. And that's a great way to start. And you are going to create that muscle of communication at a long time zone difference. That's going to help you a lot once you actually create an office.
Yeah, I agree. Building a distributed team, building a team that's not distributed is hard enough when you're a founder, and getting that right and getting communication to flow. We do a lot of work flexibility. People work from home, so we have these systems that allow us to stay in touch even when we're in different locations. But we did consider opening a Silicon Valley office in the early days. And when we looked at just the cost of keeping those two teams feeling like one, it didn't seem to make sense. I would say until you're big enough that you're really outgrowing your space and there are true economic advantages that are worth the communication trade-offs you have to make, keep your team all in one place, or if you have a remote working situation, that works too. Yeah.
I have a slightly different opinion. So I think it's important to be smart about how you're distributing, but I've seen a number of startups that start distributed in a way because they will buy versus build certain functionality that they don't have in-house by working with other companies that they can partner with to get that functionality within their company. In Detroit, there's the Motor City Match, which every quarter is providing $500,000 of grant funding to companies that are starting or expanding in Detroit. And it gives an opportunity for companies that are looking to move to Detroit to be able to have some assistance in doing that. But also, it helps companies that want to start an office in Detroit for some portion of their distributed team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had an interesting question come up on the screen here in relation to distributed teams. Should you start in Silicon Valley or expand there once in growth? And I guess kind of a follow-up to that question, like what are the differences between how do you kind of maintain culture between the same company you start, or the first office and then the second office? So a couple questions within there.
We haven't done that, but we looked into it and assumed it would be a huge challenge. One thing you guys might encounter, when I was raising my seed round, I had multiple investors in Silicon Valley tell me that they would fund me if I would move there and start the company there. I don't know if that still happens today. This was like 2012. I think there's wider recognition that startups can be built in other cities at this point. But you might be faced with that, and you might have to make a decision. And I can't, the answer is different for everybody, but I think at this point, starting up there has its own set of challenges with the jungle, the war for talent. So you can maybe be prepared for that. If you're going to go pitch Valley VCs for an early stage round, and they ask you, would you move your company here? Think about why your city is advantageous compared to moving the company to the Valley. Mm-hmm. Give them a good reason why you're not doing that, if that's your position, and that's just like a good thing to be prepared for.
Yeah. They never asked us to move. They did ask me to move.
Yeah.
But not the company. I'd say it really depends of your product. If you have like a tech product like ours, it makes sense to be in the Silicon Valley because that's where most of the ecosystems here is. And that's very helpful for you. If you are not from the Valley, then just travel there. You need to be there, but you may not need to create the company there. And of course, if you have another product, like yours, I mean, for me, it doesn't make any sense to be in the Valley. Yeah, there is no advantage.
There's not a one-size-fits-all answer for this. A lot really depends on the type of company it is and what is involved in producing that service or product. And that will really yield different answers when it comes to where should the team be, how distributed should the team be as well.
Yeah, and then another question. Oh, interesting. So I'll ask you a little bit about your respective startup scenes. So Jill, I'll start with you. Given that you used to be in Detroit, what kind of bottlenecks did entrepreneurs there experience, and how did you try to alleviate that?
Well, the Motor City Match, I think, is a great example of assistance coming to entrepreneurs with something that had been a gap. When I came to Detroit, which was a little over 4 years ago now, entrepreneurs were having some trouble finding space. And that was something that was surprising, given that there was so much big and commercial space available. And so the Motor City Match really closed that gap and helped the owners of space, commercial space specifically, to be able to match to entrepreneurs who were interested in becoming tenants in that space. And it also helped with providing technical assistance and grant funding to help those businesses to get open in those spaces. And so through programs like the Motor City Match, the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, which provides debt funding, and other sorts of convenings and support for the ecosystem, there's an opportunity to make sure that there's a balanced and growing ecosystem in a city.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Tracy, how do you feel like the Los Angeles startup scene has changed since you first started your company? We had one question in particular, if the arrival of Peter Thiel has changed the scene at all, but that was pretty recent, so I'm not sure if you're feeling that yet.
So LA's changed a ton. Just a lot of capital infusion, a lot of growth in the startup scene since I started. There were, tech and startups was really brand new when I started, and now most of Santa Monica is just filled with startups, and a lot of people from Hollywood and entertainment have moved over into startups. We've not yet felt Peter Thiel's presence per se. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm not quite sure what he's doing, because he said that he was leaving the Valley because the left-leaning politics were becoming kind of suffocating for him. And I think he's going to find that in LA we are even more progressive and less excited about him than the community he's leaving. So we'll see what happens. But I've not heard many people in LA feeling warm and fuzzy about his arrival.
Mm-hmm. And then, Nicolas, one thing that I know comes up a lot when I talk to Bay Area startups is, especially younger talent or talent who wants to go start a family leaving the Bay Area. I think last year the Bay Area had the highest out-migration rate it had in, several years. So is that something you're noticing with your talent in San Francisco, or is talent itching to leave?
Not yet. No one in the company has asked me to leave. We had a couple of people moving to Paris, actually.
Right.
So that happened, but it's pretty rare. So not yet. The thing is that I would say that I saw also one of the questions. I would say that the biggest advantage of the Valley is actually that the access to very senior talents. So if you are looking for CMO, VP sales, like executives in the tech world, you are only going to find them in San Francisco. So that's, for me, still the key advantage of the Bay Area.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you so much for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.